Everyone came for the little boy. Until one cowboy chose the girl nobody wanted.
Everyone came for the little boy, until one cowboy chose the girl nobody wanted. The train hissed to a stop at the Harmon station at 10 minutes past 8 on a Thursday morning in April of 1883, and the children were lined up on the platform like fence posts. 12 of them, scrubbed raw by the matron's lye soap, dressed in wool that itched something fierce, standing in the Kansas sun with their shadows stretched thin beneath them. The little boy was first in line. That was no accident. Nathaniel Bright, Nathan they called him, was 6 years old, with corn silk hair and eyes the color of creek water. And he had that particular gift some children have of looking exactly like what every person in the world wishes they could save. He smiled when the farm wives approached. He said "ma'am" without being prompted. He did not fidget. And they came for him. Of course they did. Miriam stood at the end of the line where they had put her. She was 13, though the card pinned to her collar said 11, a lie the agent had written himself, because 13 was too old for sympathy and too young for respect, and because 11 kept her eligible for the indenture contracts he sold to the millmen. She wore a faded gingham dress with a collar buttoned to her throat, and she kept her chin up, because her mother had told her once that a person's dignity was the one thing nobody could take unless you handed it to them. The scar started at her left temple and ran down her jaw, a rope of twisted pink tissue from the tenement fire that had taken her mother and given her nightmares for 2 years. She did not hide it. Hiding it took energy she needed for other things. She watched the couples approach Nathan. She watched Mrs. Pruitt from the mercantile kneel down and cup his face like she was buying a calf. She watched the banker from Creel County measure Nathan's teeth with his eyes. She watched Nathan smile at each of them, because Nathan smiled at everyone, and because he did not yet understand that love in this world often looked like shopping. "You're doing fine," Miriam whispered to him when the crowd shifted. "Just fine." Nathan glanced back at her, and for a moment his smile flickered. "Miriam." "Don't," she said softly. "Don't make it hard." She had been preparing him for this since they left New York. She had told him that the West was full of good people with warm houses, that he would have a bed and a table and maybe a dog, that she would find him again someday. She had not told him that girls with burn scars and no dowry and no family did not get chosen. She had not told him that she was the price of his salvation, the weight that would be left behind so the train could move lighter on its return journey. By noon, Nathan had 3 offers. By 1 o'clock he was holding the hand of a woman in a blue bonnet who looked kind enough, who said she had a room with a window that faced the morning sun. Miriam watched him go. He looked back once. She nodded at him, the way her mother used to nod when she wanted a child to believe everything would be all right. Then he was gone, and the platform emptied, and Miriam stood alone with the agent and 2 boys who coughed too much. The agent, his name was Aldrich, and he wore a black suit that smelled of tobacco and sealing wax, consulted his ledger. "Unclaimed," he said, writing the word beside her name with a flourish. "The industrial school in Topeka has room. You'll ride with the freight at 6. Miriam did not answer. She had learned that men like Aldrich interpreted silence as agreement, and she preferred that to the alternative. She was standing there, watching the dust settle where Nathan had walked, when the cowboy arrived. He came from the south end of the platform, moving with the unhurried patience of a man who had never in his life been rushed by anyone successfully. He was tall, wide through the shoulders, with hands that looked like they had been handling rope and leather since childhood. His coat was good wool, worn at the cuffs. His hat was decent but not new. He had the look of a man who had money enough but no interest in proving it. He stopped 10 feet from the line and looked at the 2 coughing boys. He looked at Aldrich, then he looked at Miriam. Not at her scar, at her eyes. "How old are you?" he asked. The question surprised her. In 3 months on the orphan train, nobody had asked her age. They had looked at her scar and moved on. 13, she said. Aldrich's pen stopped. "The card says 11. 13, Miriam repeated, because something in the cowboy's gaze made lying feel impossible. The cowboy nodded slowly. He looked at her hands, red and chapped from lye soap and cold water, and at her boots, which were 2 sizes too large and stuffed with newspaper at the toes. "Can you ride?" he asked. "I don't know," she said. "I've never tried." "Can you work?" "Yes." "Can you keep your word?" She looked at him then, really looked at him, and she saw what she had missed at first. There was a grief in him, settled deep behind the eyes, the kind that does not announce itself but makes a home in a person's face. She recognized it because she carried the same grief, mirrored on the other side of her scar. "Yes," she said. "I'm Emmett Ward," he said. "I have a ranch 12 miles north. I came here today because I heard there was a boy who needed a home, but I find I'm more interested in the girl nobody's asking about." Aldrich stepped forward, his ledger clutched like a shield. "Mr. Ward, I appreciate your Christian impulse, but this child is already spoken for. The Topeka Industrial School is a textile mill that pays you $4 a head for healthy children and $2 for damaged ones," Emmett said. He did not raise his voice. "I know the school, Mr. Aldrich. I know the man who runs it. I also know that indenture contracts for children under 12 require a judge's signature, and I don't see one on your paperwork." Miriam felt something shift in her chest. She did not have a name for it. Hope, perhaps. But hope had been dangerous for so long that she barely recognized its shape. Aldrich's face reddened. "The girl is unclaimed property of the Children's Aid Society, and I have authority." "Authority that ends at the state line," Emmett said, "and we're 2 miles inside Kansas, which means unless you have a Kansas court order, you're transporting children across state lines for labor purposes, which is a federal matter." He paused. "I'm not a lawyer, Mr. Aldrich, but I know a man who is, and I know a federal marshal in Topeka who would find your ledger very interesting reading." The platform had gone quiet. The station master had stopped sweeping. A woman with a basket of eggs had paused to listen. Aldrich sputtered. "You can't just... This is irregular. There are procedures." "The procedure," Emmett said, "is that you release this child to my custody, or I ride to the telegraph office and we find out exactly how irregular your procedures are." Miriam stood very still. She understood, in the way that children who have survived terrible things understand, that she was watching a power she had never seen before, the power of a man who knew the law well enough to bend it toward mercy instead of away from it. Aldrich looked at his ledger, at the crowd, at the cowboy's steady gaze. He made a calculation. "She's damaged goods," he said, gesturing at Miriam's scar. "You understand that? She won't fetch a husband. She won't be pretty. She's got nightmares. I hear her screaming at the boarding house." "Then she'll fit right in," Emmett said. "I have nightmares too." He held out his hand to Miriam, not to Aldrich, to her. She looked at the hand. It was calloused and scarred across the knuckles, and it was steady. She thought of Nathan, walking away with the woman in the blue bonnet. She thought of her mother in the fire, pushing her toward the window. She thought of every time she had been looked at and found wanting. She put her hand in his. It was not a romantic moment. It was not a rescue. It was a transaction between two people who had both lost things, acknowledging that survival sometimes looks like choosing each other. If you've ever been the person nobody picked for the team, the child left standing against the wall when the music stopped, you know what Miriam felt in that moment. You know the particular temperature of that silence, and you know why she did not cry. Because crying would have meant she had expected something different, and she had trained herself not to expect. They walked to the livery stable where Emmett's horse was waiting. He did not ask her about the scar. He did not ask her to be grateful. He handed her a biscuit wrapped in cloth, and she ate it without tasting it, because her body had forgotten how to receive kindness and did not know what to do with it. "There's a room at the ranch," he said. "It's small. It faces east. The girl who used to sleep there liked the morning light." Miriam stopped walking. "Your daughter?" Emmett's jaw tightened, not with anger, but with the particular rigidity of a man holding something heavy. "Yes, her name was Lucy. She would have been 14 this spring. There was a fire 4 years ago." Miriam touched her own scar without thinking. "I'm sorry." "So am I," he said. "Every day. But I've learned that sorrow doesn't disappear when you share it. It just becomes easier to carry." They rode out of Harmon as the afternoon sun turned the prairie gold. Emmett put her on his horse in front of him, and she had never been on a horse before, and she was terrified. And she did not tell him because she had learned that admitting fear was the first step toward having it used against you. but he felt her stiffen, and he said, "Hold the mane, not too tight. She won't drop you. Her name is Bess, and she's carried worse things than a 13-year-old girl." The ranch was smaller than she expected and more solid. A house of whitewashed plank, a barn that needed paint but not repair, a corral with 3 horses, and a dog that came out to meet them with the lazy enthusiasm of an animal that had never been kicked hard enough to learn caution. Inside, the house smelled of coffee and wood smoke and something else, leather maybe, or the particular scent of a place that had been lived in by the same person for a long time. There was a table with 1 chair, and a stove that worked, and a shelf with 6 books. Emmett showed her the room. It was small. It faced east. There was a bed with a quilt that had been pieced in colors Miriam recognized, blue and yellow, the colors of warmth. On the wall was a drawing of a horse, done in pencil, the work of a child who had loved animals. "Lucy drew that," Emmett said. "She wanted to be an artist, or a veterinarian. She hadn't decided." He paused. "You can take it down if you want." Miriam looked at the drawing. The horse had kind eyes. "No," she said. "I'd like to keep it." The days that followed were not easy. Miriam did not know how to milk a cow. She did not know how to build a fire in a stove that drew differently than the tenement grates. She burned the first batch of biscuits so thoroughly that the dog wouldn't eat them, and she stood in the kitchen with her hands shaking, waiting for the blow that did not come. Emmett scraped the biscuits into the fire and said, "My wife made worse ones the first time. She used salt instead of sugar. We ate them anyway because we were young and in love and too proud to admit defeat." He handed Miriam the mixing bowl. "Try again." She tried again. They were better. But the world does not let happiness build without testing it. On the 4th day, Aldrich came. He arrived in a buckboard with a man in a cheap suit who had the look of a lawyer who had never won a case he couldn't buy. They brought papers, thick, official, stamped with seals that looked important. "Mr. Ward," Aldrich said, standing in the yard with his hat in his hands, trying to look like a reasonable man. "I have here a writ of recovery from the district court in Topeka. The child Miriam Holt is bound by indenture to the Bright Future Industrial Academy. Your interference has been noted, and unless you release her into my custody by Friday noon, you will face charges of kidnapping and child theft." Emmett took the papers. He read them slowly, his face giving away nothing. Then he handed them back. "These are Kansas papers," he said. "Miriam was transported from New York. The Children's Aid Society placed her under your care for relocation, not for sale to a textile mill. If you had a legitimate indenture, it would have been filed in New York before departure. It wasn't." The lawyer stepped forward. "The court recognizes the Society's authority to place children as it sees fit. You are a single man with no wife, no family, and no legal standing to take a female child. The court considers this a moral issue. Mr. Ward, a question of propriety." Miriam stood in the doorway listening. She understood now what she had only suspected before. She was not a person to them. She was inventory. An inventory that talked back, that had scars and opinions and a habit of looking men in the eye, was inventory that needed to be moved quickly before it spoiled the rest of the stock. Emmett looked at the lawyer for a long moment. Then he looked at Aldrich. "You told me she was 11, he said. "Her mother's letter says she was born in March of 1870. That makes her 13. In Kansas, a child over 12 may choose their own guardian if deemed of sound mind by a court. I've already wired Judge Harlan in Harmon. He'll be here Monday." Aldrich paled. "You can't. There's no time." "Friday to Monday is 3 days, Emmett said. "Plenty of time for you to explain to a judge why you falsified ages on state transport documents. Or you can tear up that writ and ride back to Topeka, and I'll forget I saw you." The lawyer looked at Aldrich. Aldrich looked at the ground. They left without another word. But Miriam saw the way Aldrich looked at her before he climbed into the buckboard. A look that said this was not finished. That inventory that talked back had a way of disappearing into machines and never being heard from again. That night, Miriam could not sleep. She sat in Lucy's room with the quilt pulled around her and listened to the wind. Emmett found her there at midnight, holding the pencil drawing of the horse. "I don't want to cause you trouble," she said. "You're not," he said. "They'll come back. Men like that always come back." "Yes," he said, "they do, but they don't always win." He sat on the edge of the bed. In the moonlight he looked older than he had in the sun. and Miriam saw that his grief was not a thing he had conquered. It was a thing he had learned to walk beside, like a companion that never stopped talking. "My daughter died because I wasn't home," he said. "The fire started in the barn. My wife tried to save the animals. Lucy followed her. I was in town, buying supplies. By the time I got back, the house was gone, and they were gone. And I stood in the ashes and understood that I had built a life on the assumption that tomorrow would be like today." He looked at Miriam. "I don't assume that anymore. I don't know if you and I will be a family. I don't know if you'll stay or if you'll run away the first chance you get. But I know that choosing not to help you would be choosing to stay in those ashes. And I'm tired of ashes." Miriam looked at the horse drawing. "My mother pushed me out the window," she said. "The fire was in the hall. She could have gone first. But she pushed me. I fell 2 stories into a pile of garbage. That's how I got this." She touched her scar. "She didn't make it out. Nathan was at the neighbor's. I couldn't go back for her. I tried, but the stairs were gone." She paused. "I dream about it. The sound of the beams falling. Her voice, telling me to jump. I wake up and I can't breathe." Emmett did not touch her. He did not say, "It wasn't your fault." He said, "Lucy used to have nightmares too. About wolves. She had never seen a wolf, but she dreamed about them. My wife would sit with her and say, 'The wolves are outside. The house is strong, and I am stronger.'" He stood up. "The house is strong, Miriam, and you are stronger than you know." He left her there and she slept, and for the first time in 4 years, she did not dream of fire. Phase 6, darkest point. Need to escalate. The trouble came on Saturday. Miriam was in the barn, learning to curry a horse that had more patience than she did, when she heard the wagon. Not the buckboard, something heavier. She went to the door and saw a sheriff's carriage, and behind it, Aldrich's wagon, and behind that, a group of men on horseback that she did not recognize but understood immediately. They had come for her. Emmett walked out of the house with a rifle. He did not raise it. He carried it the way a carpenter carries a hammer, as a tool that might be needed, not as a threat. The sheriff was a thin man with a mustache that looked like it required more attention than he gave his duties. "Mr. Ward," he said, "I have a warrant for your arrest. Disturbing the peace, interference with a federal agent, and," he consulted a paper, "moral corruption of a minor. Mr. Aldrich has produced witnesses who say you took this girl for immoral purposes." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Miriam felt her face burn, not with shame but with a rage so pure it made her vision narrow. She walked out of the barn and stood beside Emmett, and she said, "That's a lie." The sheriff looked at her with the bored expression of a man who had stopped hearing children years ago. "Girl, you don't understand what's happening here. Mr. Aldrich is offering you a chance at an education and honest work. This man is offering you—" "An honest man," Miriam said, "which is more than you are, if you believe that liar." Aldrich smiled. It was a small smile, private, meant only for her. It said, "I told you, inventory that talks back gets broken." Emmett handed the rifle to Miriam. She took it, surprised by its weight. "Hold this," he said. Then he walked to the sheriff and held out his hands. "I'll ride with you," he said. "But the girl stays here, and I want it noted that I am surrendering voluntarily, which means you don't need to search the property or touch anything that belongs to her." The sheriff hesitated. He had expected resistance. He had prepared for it. Voluntary surrender confused him. "Mr. Ward," the sheriff began. "That night, he made stew. It was not good stew. It was thick and heavy and oversalted. But Miriam ate 3 bowls because it was hot, and because it was given freely, and because nobody was watching her eat to see if she deserved it." Emmett ate across from her without speaking much, and when she was done, he said, "I don't need a servant. I don't need a daughter. I need a person who can help me remember that the world still has good things in it. Can you do that?" "I can try," she said. "Then that's enough." "I'll ride with you," Emmett repeated. "But you leave the girl, and you leave my foreman, Jed, to look after the place. He's inside, and he has a shotgun, and he's not as patient as I am." One of the riders laughed. Another shifted in his saddle. The sheriff looked at Aldrich, who was no longer smiling. 3 days, Emmett said to Aldrich. "Judge Harlan, Monday. I'll see you there." They took him. Miriam watched the wagon roll away, and she stood in the yard with a rifle she did not know how to fire, and she understood that for the first time in her life someone had chosen her, and now she had to choose him back. Monday arrived like a held breath. The Harmon courthouse was a brick building with a clock that did not work, and a courtroom that smelled of varnish and old sweat. The benches were full. Word had spread that Emmett Ward was on trial, and the town had come to see what happened when a single man tried to take a scarred orphan girl against the wishes of the Children's Aid Society. Aldrich sat at the plaintiff's table with his lawyer, looking like a man who had already won. The sheriff sat beside him, looking like a man who wished he were fishing. Judge Harlan was a broad woman with iron-gray hair and the only gavel in the county, and she did not look like someone who suffered fools. Emmett sat at the defense table alone. He had refused a lawyer. He said he had nothing to hide and no money to waste. Miriam sat in the front row, wearing a dress that Emmett's neighbor, Mrs. Calloway, had lent her. It was too big, and it smelled of lavender, but it was clean, and she sat in it with her back straight and her scar visible for everyone to see. Aldrich's lawyer made his case. He spoke of propriety and moral standards. He spoke of single men and female children and the dangers of the frontier. He produced the writ, the transport papers, the indenture contract. He made it all sound very reasonable, very legal, very inevitable. Then Judge Harlan looked at Emmett. "Mr. Ward?" Emmett stood up. He did not look at Aldrich. He looked at Miriam. "Your Honor," he said, "I am not a lawyer. I am a rancher. I lost my wife and daughter in a fire 4 years ago, and I have been walking around ever since like a man who left something important in a room he can't find. I came to the train station 2 weeks ago because I heard there was a boy who needed a home, but I saw this girl standing at the end of the line, watching everyone take the child she had protected, and I saw something I recognized." He paused. "I saw someone who had already been through the fire and was still standing. I saw someone who didn't need saving. She needed choosing." The courtroom was silent. "I have no legal training," Emmett continued, "but I have this." He held up a letter. It was in Miriam's pocket when she arrived. It is from her mother, dated March 1870, the day Miriam was born. It names her father, who died before she knew him. It asks whoever finds this child to keep her safe and to keep her with her brother. It proves she is 13. It proves Mr. Aldrich falsified her age. And it proves, he turned to Aldrich, that you separated siblings for profit, which violates the society's own charter. Aldrich stood up. "That letter is a forgery." "Then let's telegraph New York," Emmett said. "Let's ask the society for the original transport manifest. Let's ask them why a 13-year-old girl was listed as 11. Let's ask them how much the Topeka mill paid you per head. Mr. Aldrich, I'm sure the federal marshal I wired on Saturday would like to hear the answers." The silence in the courtroom was different now. It was the silence of a crowd realizing they had been on the wrong side of something. Judge Harlan took the letter. She read it. She looked at Aldrich. "Mr. Aldrich," she said, "do you have the original New York placement records with you?" "I know, they're in Topeka." "Then I suggest you retrieve them before the federal marshal arrives, which, according to the telegram I received this morning, will be Wednesday." Aldrich's face went the color of old lard. He looked at his lawyer. The lawyer looked at the door. "The writ is dismissed," Judge Harlan said. "Mr. Ward, you have petitioned for guardianship?" "I have, Your Honor." "And Miss Holt, do you accept this guardianship? Do you choose Mr. Ward as your guardian?" Every eye in the courtroom turned to Miriam. She stood up. The dress was too big. The scar was visible. She was 13 years old, and she had been unwanted for so long that the word had started to feel like a name. "I choose him," she said. "Then it is so ordered," Judge Harlan said. "Guardianship granted. Mr. Aldrich, you are remanded into the sheriff's custody pending investigation. Court is adjourned." The gavel fell, and Miriam Holt, who had been nobody's choice, walked out of that courtroom on the arm of a man who had chosen her when everyone else had come for the little boy. That spring they planted a garden. Miriam had never planted anything in soil that wasn't ash, and she found that she liked the feeling of seeds in her palm, the particular promise of something that would grow if you gave it time and water and patience. Nathan came to visit on Sundays. The woman in the blue bonnet, Her name was Mrs. Greer, and she was kind in the way that mattered, which meant she let Nathan be a child, brought him in a wagon, and he and Miriam would walk down to the creek and throw stones. And he would tell her about his new dog and his bed with the morning window. And she would tell him about the horses and the garden and the way Emmett burned biscuits worse than she did. "You could come live with us," Nathan said once. "Mrs. Greer said there's room." Miriam shook her head. "I have a home," she said, "and I have a person who chose me. That's different." "Different how?" "Choosing is when you could have had something else and you picked this anyway. Mrs. Greer is good to you. But Emmett picked me when there was nobody else picking. That means he saw something. I have to find out what it is." She found out slowly. She found out that Emmett Ward laughed at bad jokes and sang hymns off-key and talked to his horses like they were old friends. She found out that he kept Lucy's drawing on the wall because looking at it hurt, and looking at it was the only way to keep her alive. She found out that he had nightmares too, and that sometimes she heard him walking the house at night, and that the sound of another person breathing in the dark made them both less afraid. She found out that she was good with horses, that she had a talent for seeing what was wrong with an animal before it showed, that she could cook after a fashion, and that she could read. Emmett taught her, using the 6 books on the shelf, and she learned fast because she had been hungry for words her whole life without knowing it. And she found out one evening in July that she could smile without thinking about it. They were sitting on the porch after supper, watching the lightning bugs come out in the tall grass. Emmett was whittling something useless out of a stick. Miriam was shelling peas. The dog was asleep on the step. "I used to think home was a place," Miriam said. "A building, 4 walls, a roof." Emmett shaved a curl of wood into the dark. "It's not?" "No," she said. "Home is the place where your scar doesn't matter, where you don't have to earn your spot at the table. Where somebody saw you, all of you, the ugly parts and the frightened parts and the parts that wake up screaming, and they said, 'Yes, that one. I'll take that one.'" Emmett stopped whittling. He looked at her, and his eyes were wet, but he did not look away. "Lucy would have liked you," he said. "I think I would have liked her too. She would have said you were brave. She would have been wrong," Miriam said. "I'm not brave. I'm just too stubborn to stop." Emmett laughed. It was a real laugh, surprised out of him, and it sounded like a man who had not expected to laugh again. "That," he said, "is the best kind of brave." In August, Judge Harlan came to dinner. She brought a cake. She said the federal marshal had found enough in Aldrich's ledger to send him to Leavenworth for a long time, and that the Bright Future Industrial Academy was being investigated, and that several children were being returned to families who had never known they were missing. In September, Miriam started school in Harmon. The other children stared at her scar. She stared back until they looked away. She was not ashamed of it anymore. It was the mark of a fire she had survived, and she had stopped surviving a long time ago. Now she was living. And one night in October, exactly 1 year after she had stepped off the orphan train into the Kansas sun, Miriam Holt sat at a table in a house that faced east, and she wrote a letter to her mother. She knew her mother would not read it. She wrote it anyway. "Dear Mama," she wrote, "I am safe. I am chosen. I am home." She folded it carefully and put it in the tin box where she kept the letter that had saved her. Then she went to the window and watched the moon rise over the prairie, and she thought about all the children still standing in lines, still waiting to be picked, still believing that unwanted was the same as unworthy. She would write to the Children's Aid Society next week. She would tell them about Aldrich. She would tell them about the other children. She would use her new reading and her new voice and her new name, Miriam Ward, because Emmett had offered and she had accepted, and the papers were filed, to make sure that someone, somewhere, would look at the end of the line and see a person instead of damaged goods. But tonight she just stood at the window and breathed. The house was strong, and she was stronger than she knew.